41 years ago, Punky Brewster made Punky, Cherie, Henry, and the whole gang unforgettable. But once the cameras shut off, their lives took turns no fan ever imagined. Fame fading, tragedies unfolding, reinventions rising, and scandals nobody saw coming. The cast you remember is nothing like the cast you'll see today. Let's find out what truly happened. George Gaynes as Henry Warnemont. George Gaynes was born on May 16, 1917, in Helsinki, Finland. At 67 years old, he played Henry Warnemont, the stubborn, lonely widower whose heart slowly melts for Punky and Punky Brewster, 1984. He arrived on set with decades of stage discipline behind him, yet this small screen role unexpectedly became the most intimate performance of his life. As the public embraced Henry, Gaynes stepped into years that would test the core of everything he believed about family. He and actress Alan Ann McClary shared a famously steady marriage, one held together through Broadway tours and long filming gaps, including Gaynes's celebrated turn in Tootsie just before joining Punky Brewster. But in 1989, at the height of his police academy fame, tragedy struck. Their son Matthew died in a car accident while filming a kayaking special for ESPN. Gaynes was still bound to promotional commitments for the franchise, meaning he had to continue smiling for cameras while privately breaking apart. That era permanently reshaped his marriage, forcing the couple to confront grief in silence while the world kept demanding laughs from Lassard. As the 1990s progressed, the emotional weight drained his enthusiasm for Hollywood, pushing him to choose only selective projects like Vanya on 42nd Street and Just Married. Acting had once been joyful discipline, but now even brief roles felt heavy, as if every script carried memories he didn't want to revisit. He gradually retreated from the industry after 2003, staying close to McClary, cherishing quiet evenings and letting the noise of Hollywood fade behind him. Those years of retreat were less about retirement and more about healing, about reclaiming pieces of himself he feared were gone forever. He died on February 15, 2016, at 98 years old, passing peacefully in his daughter's Washington home after years of choosing privacy over applause. His burial was modest, the way he wanted. No spectacle, no headlines, only family, memories, and the quiet dignity that defined his final decade. His estimated $5 million net worth reflected a lifetime of steady, disciplined work rather than extravagance or fame. Soleil Moon Frye as Penelope. Punky Brewster. Soleil Moon Frye was born on August 6, 1976 in Glendora, California. At 8 years old, she played Punky Brewster, the fearless, scraped-knee orphan whose optimism defined Punky Brewster, 1984. The role turned her into an 80s icon overnight. The fame was bright, but the spotlight would shadow her for decades. Her marriage to producer Jason Goldberg began during a period of reinvention, as she shifted from childhood stardom to directing her debut film Wild Horses and later joining Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Those opportunities brought long shoot schedules, cross-country flights, and a pace of work that quietly tightened stress inside a marriage already stretched by 4 pregnancies in 11 years. Their worlds slowly grew in opposite directions, her expanding creative ambitions, his demanding production calendar, until the strain became impossible to ignore. By the time their divorce finalized in 2022, Soleil was balancing motherhood, work, and emotional fallout alone, still appearing in projects while processing a heartbreak she never had space to unravel. During her teens, gigantomastia reshaped both her physical life and emotional identity, forcing her to undergo breast reduction surgery at just 15. Though it brought relief, it left her battling painful scar tissue, breathing issues, and hormonal treatments that collided with her early adult acting years. On sets like Sabrina, she often concealed medical bandages under costume layers, performing through discomfort to protect a career that felt fragile. Those complications resurfaced during her pregnancies, influencing which scripts she accepted and pushing her toward directing and voice work like The Proud Family, where she could control her schedule and health more carefully. At 49 years old in 2025, Frye remains active, producing documentaries, acting selectively, and running her Moon Frye eco-friendly brand while raising her 4 children as a single mother. Her estimated $5 million net worth reflects decades of reinvention across television, film, and business ventures she built to ensure stability after years of turbulence. Susie Garrett as Betty Johnson. Susie Garrett was born on December 29, 1929, in Detroit, Michigan. At 55 years old, she played Betty Johnson, the strict, church-raised grandmother who protected Cherie with a fierce, unshakable love in Punky Brewster, 1984. Her performance grounded the series with authority and soul, built from decades of jazz club grit and stage discipline. And as the role expanded, the emotional weight behind her smile deepened in ways the audience never saw. Her family life was steady but exhausting, built around raising 4 sons while juggling club sets, rehearsals, and recurring roles like her appearances on her sister Marla Gibbs's sitcom 227. Hollywood often reduced her to narrow stereotypes, offering her funny black aunt roles that insulted her training and her ambition. Even while filming Wicked Stepmother, 1989, with Bette Davis, she rushed home after shoots to care for grandchildren, stretching herself between duty and dream. That constant tug-of-war slowly drained her, leaving her carrying a private fatigue she didn't dare reveal. By the early 1990s, her health began to falter. Shortness of breath became an unwelcome companion, and stage nights grew harder to finish as lung cancer quietly tightened its grip. Chemotherapy overlapped with teaching sessions at the Crossroads Art Academy she co-founded, where she still pushed students to fight for roles she herself had been denied. Even when her world shrank to hospital rooms and unfinished scripts, she kept working, insisting that creativity was the only part of her life the illness could not touch. Susie Garrett died on May 24, 2002, at 72 years old in Southfield, Michigan, and was laid to rest at Woodlawn Cemetery. Her estimated $500,000 net worth reflected a lifetime of steady but undervalued labor, a career built on persistence rather than privilege. What she left behind was far greater, a blueprint of resilience for every black actress who dared to demand respect in a world determined to shrink her. Cherie Johnson and Cherie Johnson. Cherie Johnson was born on November 21, 1975, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At 9 years old, she played Cherie Johnson, the loyal, sharp-tongued best friend who brought warmth and spark to Punky Brewster, 1984. The series made her a familiar face, long before she understood what fame or public scrutiny meant. Her romantic life unfolded in fragile intervals, short relationships that collapsed under the weight of single motherhood and Hollywood's demands. During her long run on Family Matters as Maxine, studio days stretched up to 12 hours, leaving her racing home to care for her daughter on little sleep. Offers that came her way often demanded she fit industry boxes rather than her own ambitions, deepening the tension between career survival and personal stability. Even success could feel like a burden, as she often felt responsible for representing black girls on TV at a time when opportunities were scarce. Stress etched itself into every stage of her adult life. As the 2000s arrived, she pivoted toward writing and producing, releasing books like Around the World Twice while juggling independent film roles. Instead of slowing down, she filled every hour, film sets, charity work, and pitch meetings, using motion as a shield against burnout. That momentum kept her career alive, but it also created a cycle where rest felt dangerous, as if pausing too long might cause Hollywood to forget her entirely. Now, at 51 years old, Cherie Johnson continues to act, write, and produce, prioritizing stories led by women of color, roles she once longed to see when she was a child star. Her estimated $1 million net worth reflects decades of work built across television, publishing, and independent cinema. More than anything, she now stands as the grown-up version of the girl audiences once loved. Still loyal, still sharp, and still determined to create the space she never had. Amy Foster as Margot Kramer. Amy Foster was born on August 5, 1975, in the United States. At 9 years old, she played Margot Kramer, the wealthy, sharp-tongued, perfectly coiffed friend whose attitude became one of Punky Brewster's most iconic contrasts. The role launched her straight out of Star Search, boosted by tap-dancing trophies and early voice-acting gigs that framed her as Hollywood's next polished ingenue. But as the set lights dimmed, life began nudging her far away from the industry that had once defined her. Her marriage to Trent DeFries anchored her, offering a stable home life in Los Angeles, and eventually 2 children who became the center of her world. Yet when she briefly returned to film troupe Beverly Hills and later the 2021 Punky Brewster revival, the whiplash between domestic stability and industry pressure hit harder than expected. Juggling auditions, on-set COVID protocols, and the constant demand to appear camera-ready after decades away forced her to confront the uncomfortable tension between who she once was and who she had become. Many nights were spent adjusting schedules, rewriting routines, and reassuring herself that motherhood and artistry could coexist, even when it didn't feel that way. As her children grew older, she felt a pull toward mentoring rather than chasing on-screen visibility. Workshops became her refuge, spaces where she rediscovered creativity through teaching rather than performing. Voice roles, including work on Pound Puppies, allowed her to stay connected to the craft without the physical demands of on-camera acting. And although these jobs asked for less public exposure, they required more emotional investment, pushing her to nurture a new generation in ways she never experienced herself as a young performer. Now 50 years old in 2025, Amy Foster balances acting classes, selective projects, and family life with the quiet resilience of someone who refused to let fame dictate her worth. Her estimated $800,000 net worth reflects decades shaped not by constant spotlight, but by steady reinvention and the courage to return only when it felt true. And in the legacy of Margot Kramer, she remains the stylish friend who grew up, not into a stereotype, but into a woman who learned how to redefine herself on her own terms. Casey Ellison as Alan Anderson. Casey Ellison was born on March 2, 1976, in California. At 8 years old, he played Alan Anderson, the clumsy, wide-eyed boy whose inventions and awkward charm softened Punky's boldness in Punky Brewster, 1984. His early career stretched into recurring roles on Mr. Belvedere and a string of 80s sitcom guest spots, painting him as one of the decade's most dependable child actors. Yet beyond the applause, adulthood greeted him with a silence Hollywood had never prepared him for. Marriage came early, and its ending unfolded in the same quiet way he lived much of his personal life. No headlines, just heartbreak, and the sudden responsibility of raising a daughter alone. The years he spent on Mr. Belvedere overlapped with rising tension at home, as long shooting days and the uncertainty of child acting placed unbearable pressure on a relationship already fighting to survive. After the divorce, financial strain crept in, forcing him to take jobs far outside entertainment simply to keep life steady. That shift marked the beginning of a long, humbling chapter where survival mattered more than nostalgia. His life changed again, less through illness and more through the emotional weight of reinvention. After Dead End, 2003, he stepped out of the spotlight entirely, first taking technical crew jobs before entering biomedical research at Purdue University. The transition demanded a discipline harsher than anything he faced as a young actor, with deadlines, lab protocols, and the silent grief of leaving behind a dream he had carried since childhood. Every new task reminded him of what he'd walked away from, yet also of the stability he needed to build for his daughter's future. Today, at 49 years old, Casey Ellison lives in Los Angeles, quietly working behind the scenes and appearing at nostalgia events only when asked. His estimated $400,000 net worth comes from years of steady, grounded work rather than the fame that once defined him. And though Hollywood remembers him as Alan Anderson, he now embraces a life shaped by resilience, responsibility, and the courage to start over. Eddie Diesen as Eddie Malvin. Eddie Diesen was born on March 6, 1957, in Cumberland, Maryland. At 27 years old, he played Eddie Malvin, the clumsy, nerdy building manager whose chaotic charm fits seamlessly into Punky Brewster, 1984. The same signature energy that lit up Grease and War Games made him instantly recognizable, and for a moment his career felt untouchable. But behind the comedic brilliance, deeper struggles were beginning to surface. Marriage brought him a fragile sense of stability. He and Linda Joyner built a home around voice studios, auditions, and weekend travel, even reconciling after separating when his unpredictable behavior became too heavy to bear. Each time the industry rejected him or a role fell through, tension seeped back into the household, carving distance where intimacy once lived. His work as Mandark on Dexter's Laboratory kept him afloat for years, but even that success couldn't quiet the emotional isolation growing inside him. The collapse began in earnest when his health failed. Open-heart surgery in 2020 left him weak and vulnerable, and a pneumonia infection shortly after stripped away what physical strength he had left. As his body recovered, his mind began to fracture. Paranoia, erratic public outbursts, and arrests that made headlines marked a devastating decline. Court documents eventually placed him under psychiatric care in Maryland, a painful confirmation that the man known for rapid-fire wit now struggled to navigate even simple moments of clarity. His absence from conventions, voice sessions, and fan events became an unspoken acknowledgement of how far things had fallen. At 67 years old, Eddie Diesen now lives quietly in Oregon, focusing on long-term recovery and avoiding the industry that once adored him. His estimated $5,000 net worth reflects years of medical expenses, lost work, and legal turmoil, an abrupt, heartbreaking contrast to the bright, frenetic comic force audiences once celebrated. Yet in every rerun of Grease or Dexter's Laboratory, a piece of his legacy still survives, echoing the brilliance that illness could dim but never fully erase. Timothy Stack as Simon P. Chillings. Timothy Stack was born on May 2, 1954, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. At 30 years old, he played Simon P. Chillings, the strict, stone-faced social worker who temporarily separated Punky from Henry in Punky Brewster, 1984. His sharp comedic instincts came from years with the Groundlings, and just as his character caused turmoil on screen, his real journey through Hollywood was already filled with its own uneasy transitions. Marriage to Jan Stack became his emotional anchor during a period when acting roles came unpredictably. While filming Back to School and recording lines for The Brave Little Toaster, he often returned home long after his children were asleep, balancing guilt with the fear of losing professional momentum. Voiceover studios booked him back-to-back, sometimes for 14-hour stretches, and the strain seeped into the quiet spaces of their marriage. Even so, the couple built routines that kept their family intact despite the chaos. As the 90s unfolded, his career reshaped itself into something more sustainable. Writing for Son of the Beach and starring in Nightstand with Dick Dietrich gave him a rare sense of creative authority after years of being hired for 5 lines here, 10 lines there. Guest spots on Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and The Golden Girls reminded people of his versatility, helping him escape the side character label little by little. Instead of chasing every audition, he began choosing projects that let him enjoy his craft without burning out. By 2025, at 71 years old, Timothy Stack enjoys a semi-retired pace in California, still jumping into a voice booth or guest episode whenever something genuinely excites him. He spends more time with his children, who often tease him about his cult following from Son of the Beach. His estimated net worth of $1 million is the quiet reward for decades of steady, adaptable work. David Ruprecht as Mr. Bowen. David Ruprecht was born on October 14, 1948 in St. Louis, Missouri. At 36 years old, he played Mr. Bowen, the cheerful radio manager who added warmth to Punky Brewster, 1984. His crisp smile and bright delivery carried the same earnestness he once showed in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. But the life behind that confidence was shaped by years of searching for purpose before finding his place in American television. His first marriage ended with the uneasy silence of two people growing in different directions. When he married Patty Colombo in 1988, he was determined not to repeat old mistakes, even as their careers took them across different cities. Hosting Supermarket Sweep demanded early call times and endless rehearsals, while Patty choreographed national stage productions that kept her on the road. Their marriage survived because they treated love like a craft, something rehearsed, refined, and chosen every day. As he entered the 90s and early 2000s, Ruprecht leaned fully into the persona that made him a household name. Supermarket Sweep turned him into a pop culture icon, and between tapings, he still managed to guest star on shows like True Blood and film small roles in movies. Hosting live game shows in Las Vegas and Atlantic City gave him a new stage. The shift brought a sense of peace he had never experienced in his younger years. At 77 years old in 2025, Ruprecht now lives a quiet, semi-retired life in Northern California with Patty, enjoying a slower pace after decades under studio lights. He occasionally hosts live event versions of The Price is Right or Family Feud, surprising fans who grew up watching him sprint through grocery aisles. His estimated net worth of $1.5 million reflects a long career built not on scandal or spectacle, but on warmth, consistency, and charm. Carl Steven as Joey Dion. Carl Steven was born on November 7, 1974, in Glendale, California. At just 13 years old, he joined Punky Brewster as Joey Dion, the mischievous, gadget-loving kid who appeared in the later seasons and blended naturally into the show's growing ensemble. His early resume exploded faster than most young actors of his generation, earning roles in projects like Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. For a moment, Hollywood seemed ready to build an entire future around him. But that bright future carried its own invisible cost. Rising fame meant rising demands, and the praise he received for playing young Spock came with a scrutiny he never had the maturity to process. When a post-tonsillectomy prescription turned into a long-term dependency on painkillers, the shift from medication to heroin came quietly and quickly. His marriage to Dawn Krakoff in 1998 briefly offered a calm center, steady routines, a growing family, and the birth of their son, Noah. But addiction crept into the household like a second intruder. Relapses, financial instability, and emotional volatility slowly eroded the marriage, forcing Dawn to separate for her safety and the stability of their child. By the late 2000s, the downward spiral had become impossible to mask. As Hollywood roles dried up, he fell into theft and high-risk behavior to support his addiction, culminating in the armed robbery that led to his 2010 conviction and a 13-year prison sentence. Former co-workers who visited him described a man struggling under the weight of regret, a once gifted performer battling cravings stronger than his own sense of identity. His net worth, once supported by steady child actor paychecks, dwindled to roughly $100,000, much of it lost to legal fees, treatment attempts, and the financial wreckage of addiction. Carl Steven died on July 31, 2011, at just 36 years old, from a heroin overdose while incarcerated at the Tucson prison facility in Arizona. The coroner listed sudden toxic shock, a stark end to a life that had drifted unbearably far from its early promise. He was buried quietly, survived by his wife Dawn and his young son Noah, whose memories of him would forever be shaped by a story cut short. Andy Gibb as Tony Glenn. Andy Gibb was born on March 5, 1958, in Stretford, England. At 27 years old, he appeared on Punky Brewster in 1984 as Tony Glenn, the charming piano instructor. His bright smile and gentle presence masked a decade of internal battles already shaping his fate. Before stepping onto the Punky Brewster set, Andy had already tasted massive global fame with his number one hits I Just Want to Be Your Everything and Shadow Dancing. But success came with a dark cost, a growing cocaine addiction that crept into every corner of his life. His marriage to Kim Reeder crumbled under the weight of drugs, paranoia, and emotional volatility, leaving him distant from his newborn daughter, Peta. By the mid-1980s, addiction had dismantled his recording career, led to bankruptcies, and cost him jobs on Solid Gold and multiple stage productions. Those close to him said he often looked frail, exhausted, and ashamed, trapped between longing for normalcy and the impossibility of escaping fame. His brothers Barry, Robin, and Maurice tried repeatedly to help him into treatment, but Andy's relapses were as sudden as his brief bursts of hope. Despite royalties and touring income, his finances crumbled, leaving him with an estimated net worth of just $5 million and overwhelming debt by the time his life ended. On March 10, 1988, Andy Gibb died at John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, England, 5 days after his 30th birthday. The cause was myocarditis, a heart inflammation made fatal by years of cocaine abuse weakening his body. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, beneath a marker engraved with the words, "An Everlasting Love." His death remains one of music's most heartbreaking losses. 41 years later, the Punky Brewster cast has lived through triumphs, heartbreaks, and reinvention far beyond what we saw on TV. Some rose again, some stepped away, and some left us far too soon. Which cast member's journey surprised you the most? And whose story should we revisit next? If you want more then and now deep dives like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us who you want to see in the next episode.